The morning coffee was still steaming when the alarm went off at the Global Communications Center in Geneva. Dr. Amanda Rivers had been working the night shift for 3 years, but she had never heard that particular sound before. It was the deep, resonating tone that meant only one thing: first contact. She dropped her mug and ran to the main console where dozens of technicians were already gathering around the massive screens. The signal was coming from somewhere beyond Pluto, broadcasting on frequencies that should have been impossible. The mathematical patterns were too complex to be natural, too organized to be random cosmic noise. "Get me Director Walsh on the line," Amanda shouted over the growing chaos in the room. "And someone start recording everything. We're going to want this documented." Director Tom Walsh arrived within 20 minutes, still wearing his pajama shirt under his hastily thrown-on jacket. He looked at the scrolling data with the same expression a mechanic might wear when seeing a completely new type of engine for the first time. "Any idea what they're saying?" he asked. Amanda nodded toward the linguistics team that had been working frantically at their computers. "The AI translation systems are making progress. It's definitely a greeting of some kind. Very formal, very official." The first complete translation came through an hour later, and it changed everything. The message was simple but profound. "Greetings to the inhabitants of the third planet. The Galactic Empire formally invites your species to join our confederation of civilized worlds. We have observed your progress and believe you are ready for membership. Please respond at your convenience." Most of the room went silent. A few people started crying. Someone in the back began laughing in a way that suggested they might be having a breakdown. Director Walsh just stared at the screen for a long moment, then pulled out his phone. "Hello, Mr. President? Yes, I know it's early. No, this isn't a drill. The next 6 hours were a whirlwind of emergency meetings, conference calls with world leaders, and hasty consultations with every expert on Earth who might have something useful to say about galactic diplomacy. The United Nations held an emergency session. Religious leaders offered prayers and guidance. Scientists ran calculations about the technological implications of faster-than-light communication. Meanwhile, Amanda and her team worked on crafting humanity's response. The politicians wanted something grand and historic. The scientists wanted detailed questions about alien technology. The military wanted to know about threats and defense capabilities. But when Amanda sat down to write the actual message that would represent all of humanity, she found herself typing something much simpler. "Thank you for the invitation. We accept your offer of membership. When would be a good time to discuss the details?" She stared at the words for a moment, then deleted them and tried again. "Greetings to the Galactic Empire. Humanity is honored by your invitation and eager to join your confederation. We have many questions and look forward to learning from your vast experience among the stars." That felt too formal. She deleted it and started over. "We appreciate the invitation. Yes, we're interested. What's the next step?" Director Walsh looked over her shoulder and frowned. "That's it? That's humanity's first official communication with aliens?" Amanda shrugged. "What else is there to say? They made an offer. We're accepting it. Everything else can be worked out in the follow-up conversations. But this is historic. This is the moment that changes everything for our species." "Right," Amanda agreed. "So we should probably get started instead of spending 3 weeks arguing about how to phrase our response." The message went out that afternoon. Short, simple, and practical. Around the world, people gathered around televisions and computer screens to watch the moment when humanity officially joined the galactic community. Many expected some kind of immediate response, perhaps a spectacular display of alien technology, or a formal welcoming ceremony broadcast across space. Instead, nothing happened for 3 days. When the reply finally came, it was even shorter than humanity's message. "Excellent. A transport vessel will arrive in your system in approximately 6 of your months. Please prepare a diplomatic delegation of no more than 12 individuals. Standard health and security protocols will be provided." That was it. No fanfare, no grand speeches about the dawn of a new age. Just logistics and scheduling. Dr. Rivers found herself oddly disappointed. After years of watching science fiction, movies and reading novels about first contact, the reality was turning out to be remarkably bureaucratic. She had expected either a massive celebration or a terrifying invasion, not what amounted to an interstellar business meeting. But as the weeks passed and humanity began preparing for their first official diplomatic mission to the stars, Amanda started to notice something interesting. While the rest of the world was busy planning parades and writing songs about humanity's cosmic destiny, the actual work of getting ready for galactic membership was proceeding with remarkable efficiency. The 12-person delegation was selected based on practical qualifications rather than political connections. The scientists focused on useful technologies that might benefit both humans and aliens. The engineers designed ships that prioritized function over appearance. Even the politicians seemed more interested in trade agreements and mutual defense, pacts than in grand symbolic gestures. It was as if humanity had collectively decided that joining a galactic empire was just another problem to be solved, like building a bridge or organizing a conference. Important certainly, but not mystical or terrifying. Just work that needed to be done. Amanda was reviewing the final preparations when Director Walsh stopped by her office with a puzzled expression. "I just got off a call with the European Space Agency," he said. "They wanted to know if we should redesign our ships to look more impressive for the aliens. You know, add some decorative elements, maybe some cultural symbols." "What did you tell them?" "I told them the ships were fine as they were. They're built to transport people safely from point A to point B. What else do they need to do?" Amanda nodded approvingly. "Makes sense. Did they have any other concerns?" "A few. The Japanese delegation wanted to know if they should bring gifts. The Russians asked about military protocols. The Australians suggested we prepare some kind of cultural presentation. And I told them we'd figure it out when we got there. The aliens invited us to join their empire, not to audition for it." Amanda smiled as she realized what was happening. While the rest of the galaxy had probably spent centuries preparing for their moment of contact with a vast interstellar civilization, humanity was approaching it the same way they approached any new situation, with practical planning, reasonable expectations, and a focus on getting things done. It would be interesting to see how the aliens reacted to that. The waiting room at Nexus Station looked like it had been designed by a committee of beings who had never actually met each other. The furniture came in 6 different sizes to accommodate various alien body types. The walls were painted in colors that supposedly looked pleasant to most species, and the air smelled like a combination of vanilla, ozone, and something that might have been flowers if flowers grew on methane worlds. Ambassador Patricia Wells sat in one of the medium-sized chairs, reading through a report on galactic trade regulations while she waited for her appointment with the Imperial Council. Next to her, Dr. Michael Torres was making notes on his tablet about the station's artificial gravity system, which he found more interesting than the elaborate welcome ceremony they had been offered. "First time meeting with the council?" asked the receptionist, a tall being with purple skin and too many joints in his arms. He had been trying to make conversation for the past 20 minutes, clearly nervous about the human delegation. "Yes," Patricia replied without looking up from her reading. "Though we've reviewed the standard protocols. Should be straightforward." The receptionist's expression suggested that nothing about the Imperial Council was ever straightforward. But before he could explain this, the massive doors to the council chamber slid open with a sound like distant thunder. "The council will see you now," announced a voice that seemed to come from the walls themselves. Patricia tucked her report into her briefcase and walked into the chamber with the same confident stride she had used when entering corporate boardrooms. Back on Earth. Dr. Torres followed, still making notes about the door mechanism, which he thought showed some interesting engineering solutions. The chamber was enormous, with a domed ceiling that displayed a real-time view of the galaxy. 12 beings sat at a curved table that could have served as a landing pad for small spacecraft. Each representative looked like they belonged in a different science fiction movie. But Patricia had reviewed their files during the 6-month journey to Nexus Station and knew exactly who she was dealing with. "Welcome, humans of Earth," boomed Council Leader Vash, whose tentacles were currently changing color in what Patricia's briefing materials had identified as a sign of either excitement or digestive distress. We are honored to receive your delegation into the heart of our great empire. Thank you for making time in your schedule, Patricia replied, settling into the chair that had been provided for her. We appreciate the opportunity to discuss membership terms. The silence that followed lasted about 10 seconds longer than was comfortable. Patricia waited patiently, having learned long ago that the first person to speak after an awkward pause usually ended up at a disadvantage. Council Leader Vash's tentacles shifted to a more confused shade of blue. We had prepared a traditional welcome ceremony. There are customary exchanges of cultural gifts, formal presentations about the history and glory of the empire, and a feast featuring delicacies from our most celebrated worlds. That sounds lovely, Patricia said. We brought some cultural materials with us if you'd like to exchange those later. But if it's all the same to you, we'd prefer to start with the practical matters. We have some questions about trade regulations, defense obligations, and administrative procedures. Dr. Torres opened his briefcase and pulled out a stack of printed documents. We've prepared some preliminary analyses of your current systems. Nothing major, just some observations about potential efficiency improvements. If the council had been quiet before, they were now silent in a way that suggested they might have collectively stopped breathing. In the Empire's 12,000-year history, no species had ever asked to skip the ceremonies and go straight to administrative reviews. Efficiency improvements, repeated Councillor Keth, whose multiple eyes were all focused on the papers Dr. Torres was organizing. Small things mostly, Dr. Torres said casually. Your supply chain management has some bottlenecks that could be eliminated with better scheduling. The communication protocols between different sectors could be streamlined. And we noticed some redundancies in your bureaucratic processes that might be costing unnecessary resources. Patricia added a data pad to the growing pile of materials on the table. We also have some thoughts about your conflict resolution procedures. The current system seems to rely heavily on formal challenges and honor-based negotiations, which probably work well for some species, but might not be the most efficient approach for every situation. Council Leader Vash's tentacles had now turned, a color that wasn't in any of Patricia's reference materials. You have thoughts about how the Empire should handle its internal affairs? Just suggestions, Patricia clarified, based on our experience with similar organizational challenges. Of course, you know your member species better than we do, so you'd be the best judges of what might work in practice. She opened her briefcase and pulled out a thick folder. We've also prepared some proposals for joint research initiatives. Earth's scientific community is excited about the possibility of collaboration, particularly in areas where we might have complementary expertise. The council members looked at each other with expressions that would have been difficult to interpret, even for beings of the same species. Finally, Councillor Ix, who resembled a cross between a tree and a very large insect, managed to speak. What kind of complementary expertise? Dr. Torres consulted his notes. Well, we noticed that most Empire technology focuses on large-scale, high-energy solutions. Very impressive, but sometimes a smaller-scale approach might be more practical. For example, your faster-than-light communication system is remarkable, but it requires massive power sources and complex infrastructure. We've been working on some ideas for more portable versions that might be useful for individual ships or remote stations. You're proposing to improve our FTL communication technology? Asked Councillor Nix, whose 4 eyes had widened to an alarming degree. Improve might be too strong a word, Patricia said diplomatically. More like adapt it for different applications. We're also interested in sharing some of our approaches to resource management, logistics coordination, and system integration. She paused, then added with a slight smile. We humans have gotten pretty good at making things work efficiently. It's sort of what we do. The rest of the meeting proceeded in a similar fashion. Patricia and Dr. Torres presented their materials, with the same calm professionalism they might use when proposing a budget adjustment or suggesting a new filing system. They asked practical questions, offered reasonable solutions, and treated the ancient and mystical Galactic Empire like a large corporation that could benefit from some organizational consulting. By the time they finished, Council Leader Vash's tentacles had settled into a steady gray color that Patricia interpreted as either thoughtfulness or mild shock. This is not what we expected, he admitted. What did you expect? Patricia asked. Awe, said Counselor Keth immediately. Wonder. Perhaps some fear. Most species spend their first meeting with the Council asking questions about our power, our history, our vast fleets, and ancient wisdom. Patricia nodded politely. Those are certainly impressive achievements, but we're more interested in the practical aspects of membership. How do we contribute? What are our responsibilities? How can we make this partnership work effectively for everyone involved? Dr. Torres gathered up his papers and added them back to his briefcase. We're looking forward to working with you. This seems like it could be a very productive relationship. As the humans left the chamber, the council sat in stunned silence for several minutes. Finally, Counselor Ix spoke what they were all thinking. Did they just treat the Galactic Empire like a business meeting? Council Leader Vash's tentacles slowly turned a deep purple. I believe they did. Should we be offended? The council leader considered this question for a long moment, then made a decision that would change the Empire forever. No, he said. I think we should take notes. The supply depot at Kepler Station had been a nightmare for 200 years. Ships would arrive expecting to refuel and restock, only to wait weeks while clerks from 14 different species argued about forms, protocols, and proper procedures. The paperwork required 17 different signatures, each in a different language, and had to be processed through 7 separate departments that apparently never talked to each other. Trade Captain Nora Phillips stood at the information desk, watching the alien clerk flip through what appeared to be several thousand pages of regulations. Around her, dozens of other ship captains sat in uncomfortable chairs, looking like they had been waiting since the station was built. Problem with your fuel requisition, the clerk finally announced, his translator making his voice sound like a bored robot. Form 2847C requires supervisor approval for quantities over 50,000 liters. Where do I get supervisor approval? Nora asked. Department of Resource Allocation, Level 7. And where is that? The clerk pointed vaguely toward the ceiling. Up. Nora had dealt with bureaucracy before. Every space captain had stories about ports where getting clearance took longer than the actual voyage. But this was something special. This was bureaucracy raised to an art form by beings who had been perfecting it for centuries. She took the lift to Level 7 and found the Department of Resource Allocation, which turned out to be a single office with a sign that said, Supervisor currently at conference, return tomorrow. Tomorrow turned into 3 days. The conference turned out to be a lunch meeting that lasted until dinner. When Nora finally tracked down the supervisor, he informed her that fuel requisitions over 50,000 liters required additional environmental impact assessments, which could only be processed by the Department of Ecological Oversight. The Department of Ecological Oversight was on Level 3, but it was closed for a religious holiday that apparently lasted for 2 weeks. When it reopened, they required a cultural sensitivity review, since some species considered fossil fuels to be sacred. The Cultural Affairs Office was on Level 12, but they were backed up because their computer system hadn't been updated since before most of the current staff were born. By the time Nora finally got her fuel requisition approved, she had spent 6 weeks at Kepler Station and had spoken to 43 different officials across 9 departments. Her cargo hold was full of forms, each one stamped and signed by beings who seemed to exist solely to pass problems along to someone else. She was preparing to leave when her communicator chimed with an incoming message from the Port Authority. Captain Phillips, please report to the Administrative Review Office. New procedures are being implemented. Nora's heart sank. More new procedures probably meant more delays, more forms, more weeks of waiting while clerks consulted manuals that nobody fully understood. But when she arrived at the Administrative Review Office, she found something unexpected. Efficiency. Captain Phillips? A human woman in a neat business suit looked up from her desk. I'm Director Linda Hayes. I understand you've been having some difficulties with your fuel requisition. It's been processed, Nora said carefully. Took 6 weeks, but I finally got all the approvals. Linda nodded sympathetically. Yes, I've been reviewing the current system. 43 different approvals for a routine fuel purchase seems excessive. She turned to her computer and pulled up Nora's file. Let me see. Standard cargo vessel, standard fuel requirement, standard destination. This should have taken about 20 minutes. 20 minutes? Well, maybe 30 if there was a queue. Linda made some notes on her screen. The good news is that we're implementing some changes. Next time you come through Kepler Station, bring your ship registration, your cargo manifest, and your destination filing. Everything else can be processed automatically. Nora stared at her. That's it? 3 documents? That's it. Oh, and if you're a repeat customer with a good safety record, which you are, we can pre-approve your standard fuel requirements. You'll be able to dock, refuel, and launch within a few hours. What happened to the environmental impact assessments? The cultural sensitivity reviews? Linda waved her hand dismissively. We integrated those into the standard safety inspection. Turns out most of the environmental concerns were already covered by existing regulations, and the cultural issues were resolved once we explained that different species have different needs. Amazing how much simpler things get when people actually talk to each other. Nora left Kepler Station in a daze. She had been trading in this sector for 15 years, and she had never seen anything change that quickly or that dramatically. More importantly, she had never seen it change in a direction that made life easier for the people actually trying to use the system. 3 months later, she returned to Kepler Station for another supply run. The entire process took 4 hours, including the time she spent having coffee with Director Hayes and discussing improvements to the cargo handling procedures. How did you do it? Nora asked over her second cup. How did you change a system that had been the same for centuries? Linda shrugged. We just asked why things were done a certain way, then looked for better alternatives. Most of the complications existed because nobody had ever bothered to question whether they were necessary. But the other species, the ones who created all those regulations, weren't they upset about the changes? Some were concerned initially, Linda admitted. But when we showed them that the new system was faster, cheaper, and actually more thorough than the old one, most of them were happy to go along with it. Turns out nobody really enjoyed spending weeks processing paperwork for routine transactions. She pulled up a chart on her computer, showing station efficiency statistics. Average processing time is down 87%. Customer satisfaction is up. Error rates are down. And we're actually generating more revenue because we can handle more ships. What about the Department of Ecological Oversight, the Cultural Affairs Office? Still there, but they're doing more useful work now. Environmental reviews are built into the standard inspection process, so they're actually more comprehensive than before. Cultural Affairs focuses on genuine cultural exchanges and conflict resolution instead of rubber stamping routine paperwork. Nora shook her head in amazement. You humans really don't do things the same way as everyone else, do you? Linda considered the question while finishing her coffee. I suppose we don't. But the funny thing is, I don't think we're doing anything revolutionary. We're just applying basic management principles and asking obvious questions. The weird part is that nobody else seems to have tried that approach before. As Nora prepared to leave, Linda handed her a small card. If you run into similar problems at other stations, let us know. We're consulting with several other facilities in the sector. Consulting? Helping them streamline their operations. Turns out a lot of places in the Empire could benefit from some organizational improvements. Nora pocketed the card and headed back to her ship, wondering what the rest of the galaxy was going to look like once humans finished improving it. The thought was both exciting and slightly terrifying. Behind her, Director Hayes was already reviewing the next system on her list, the Imperial Customs Authority, which currently required an average of 43 days to process interstellar shipping permits. Linda estimated she could get that down to less than a week. It would be interesting to see how the Empire reacted to that level of efficiency. War had come to the Aldris system in the form of 300 stolen warships and a madman calling himself Supreme Admiral Rex. For 8 months, his fleet of pirates, deserters, and fanatics had been hitting merchant convoys and raiding mining stations while the Imperial Navy chased shadows across empty space. The Empire's response had been magnificent in its traditional way. Admiral Thok of the 7th Fleet had declared a holy crusade against the raiders. Admiral Nex of the 12th Fleet had challenged Supreme Admiral Rex to single combat among the moons of Aldris Prime. The Kron battle group had composed 3 epic poems about the coming victory and broadcast them across subspace so everyone would know about their glorious intentions. Meanwhile, the raids continued. Colonel Sarah Martinez sat in the cramped briefing room of the supply ship that served as her mobile headquarters, studying shipping reports and mining schedules while her staff worked at portable computers around her. Outside, the small viewport, she could see the lights of Admiral Thok's flagship, where the Admiral was probably planning another dramatic assault on an empty asteroid field. Latest intelligence report, announced Lieutenant Commander Jeff Williams, dropping a tablet on the table. The raiders hit another convoy yesterday. Same pattern as before. They knew exactly when and where to strike, then vanished before our ships could respond. Sarah nodded while reviewing the data. They're getting inside information. Someone's telling them which convoys to hit and which areas to avoid. Could be anyone, Jeff said. The Empire has about 40,000 people with access to shipping. Schedules. 40,000? Give or take. The information goes to fleet commanders, logistics coordinators, port authorities, mining supervisors, trade guilds, and safety inspectors, plus all their staff members, assistant supervisors, and administrative clerks. Sarah stared at him. Why do safety inspectors need to know convoy schedules? So they can plan their inspection routes efficiently. And trade guilds? So they can coordinate with their member companies. And assistant supervisors? Jeff shrugged. So they can assist the supervisors. Sarah was quiet for a moment, then pulled up the Empire's organizational chart on her computer. The shipping coordination system looked like a spider web designed by someone having a nervous breakdown. Information flowed through dozens of departments, each of which shared it with several other departments, who passed it along to their various sub-departments and associated organizations. How did anything ever arrive on time? She muttered. Mostly, it doesn't, Jeff admitted. That's why convoy schedules have to be distributed so widely. Everyone needs advance notice because the system runs about 3 weeks behind schedule most of the time. Sarah spent the next 2 days reviewing the Empire's logistics network, and what she found was both impressive and terrifying. The system was incredibly elaborate, with backup procedures for the backup procedures and contingency plans that had their own contingency plans. It was also incredibly vulnerable, because it depended on thousands of people having access to sensitive information. On the 3rd day, she called Admiral Thok. Colonel Martinez. The Admiral greeted her with the enthusiasm of someone who had been waiting 8 months for good news. Do you have intelligence about the location of the criminal Rex? My fleet stands ready for glorious battle. Not exactly, Admiral, but I think we can solve the information leak problem. Excellent. Have you identified the traitor among us? It's more complicated than that, Sarah said. The problem isn't one traitor. The problem is that convoy schedules are being shared with thousands of people who don't actually need them. She transmitted her analysis to the Admiral's ship. I'm proposing a new information distribution system. Instead of sending complete schedules to everyone, we send each group only the specific information they need for their particular job. Admiral Thok was quiet for a moment while he reviewed the proposal. This is very different from traditional procedures. Yes, but it should reduce the number of people with access to sensitive information from about 40,000 to about 200. 200? Ship captains, fleet coordinators, and senior logistics officers. Everyone else gets their information on a need-to-know basis, just before they need it. The Admiral's next question revealed exactly how different human thinking was from standard Imperial procedure. Will this make the system more efficient? Much more efficient. Convoy schedules can be finalized closer to departure time, which means more flexibility in routing and better response to changing conditions. Information will be more accurate because it won't be filtered through 15 different departments, and coordination will be simpler because fewer people will be involved in the process. Sarah paused, then added, It will also make it much harder for raiders to predict convoy movements. Implement it immediately, Admiral, Thok ordered. The new system went into effect the following week, and the results were immediate. Convoy schedules that had previously taken 6 weeks to coordinate were being finalized in 3 days. Ships were arriving closer to their scheduled times because there were fewer opportunities for miscommunication. Most importantly, the raiders suddenly stopped hitting convoys with perfect timing. Supreme Admiral Rex responded by intensifying his attacks on mining stations, apparently trying to force the Imperial Navy into the kind of dramatic battle he preferred. The Empire's admirals were happy to oblige, launching massive search-and-destroy missions while broadcasting challenges across subspace. Colonel Martinez had a different idea. Instead of hunting for the raider fleet, she focused on their logistics. Raiders needed fuel, food, spare parts, and ammunition, just like any other military force. They had to get those supplies somewhere, and there were only so many places in the Aldris system where a fleet could resupply without attracting attention. She put surveillance teams at every fuel depot, supply station, and maintenance facility in the sector. Not dramatic military operations, just small teams of observers with good sensors and communication equipment. When Supreme Admiral Rex's ships showed up to refuel, the surveillance teams simply reported their location and followed them when they left. Within 2 weeks, Colonel Martinez had located the raiders' main base, a hidden facility in the asteroid belt that had been carefully camouflaged to look like an abandoned mining station. She also knew their patrol routes, their supply schedules, and the locations of their secondary bases. The final operation was almost anticlimactic. Instead of a glorious space battle, Colonel Martinez simply cut off the raiders' supply lines and waited. When Supreme Admiral Rex tried to break out of the asteroid belt, he found Imperial ships waiting at every exit route. When he tried to retreat to his hidden base, he discovered that his fuel depot had been occupied and his supply ships had been captured. The surrender came via subspace transmission. "This is Supreme Admiral Rex to Imperial forces. We are prepared to discuss terms." Admiral Thok was deeply disappointed that there hadn't been a single dramatic battle, but he couldn't argue with the results. The entire raider fleet had been captured with minimal casualties and no damage to Imperial ships or civilian installations. "How did you know it would work?" he asked Colonel Martinez during the post-operation briefing. "It's the same approach we'd use for any logistics problem," she replied. "Identify the critical supply chains, monitor the key choke points, and control the resources your opponent needs to operate." The only unusual thing about this situation was that we were dealing with hostile forces instead of civilian shipping. Admiral Thok considered this for a moment. "You treated it like a management problem." "Well, yes. Most problems are management problems when you get down to the basics." The Admiral shook his head slowly. "Humans have a very strange way of thinking about warfare." Colonel Martinez smiled. "We have a strange way of thinking about most things, but it seems to work." The emergency session of the Imperial High Command had been called because Emperor Kal was having trouble sleeping. Not because of any particular crisis or immediate threat, but because he had been reviewing reports about human activities across the Empire for the past 6 months, and the pattern was keeping him awake at night. General Rebecca Stone sat at the conference table surrounded by alien military leaders, whose names required 3 different kinds of vocal cords to pronounce correctly. She had arrived at the capital, expecting to discuss routine administrative matters, but the expressions around the table suggested this meeting was anything but routine. "General Stone," Emperor Kal began, his voice carrying the weight of authority that came from ruling 3,000 worlds. "We need to discuss your species." Rebecca waited politely. In her experience, it was usually better to let people explain what they thought the problem was before trying to solve it. "In the past 2 years," the Emperor continued, "human advisors have been consulted by over 400 Imperial facilities. Trade efficiency in those sectors has improved by an average of 63%. Military coordination has improved by 47%. Administrative processing times have been reduced by an average of 71%. He paused, then added, "These improvements have saved the Empire approximately 14 billion credits and reduced civilian complaints by 82%. Rebecca nodded. "Those sound like positive results." "They are," agreed Defense Minister Vax, whose purple tentacles were writhing in what Rebecca had learned to recognize as agitation. "That's the problem. I'm not sure I follow." Emperor Kal. touched a control, and a galactic map appeared above the conference table. Hundreds of star systems were highlighted in different colors, showing the spread of human influence across Imperial space. Every facility that has implemented human organizational suggestions has seen dramatic improvements in efficiency and effectiveness, the Emperor explained. Word is spreading. Sector governors are requesting human advisors. Trade guilds are asking for human consultants. Even our military academies are incorporating human tactical principles into their training programs. General Stone studied the map. The pattern was clear. Human influence was spreading across the Empire like water finding the easiest path downhill. Not through conquest or political maneuvering, but through simple word-of-mouth recommendations from people who had seen the results. "Are there any complaints about our methods?" she asked. "None," said Admiral Nex, whose warrior species had initially been skeptical of human military tactics. "That's what concerns us. Your approaches work so consistently that resistance is minimal. Even traditionalist factions are adopting human organizational principles." Foreign Minister Tal leaned forward, his multiple eyes focusing intently on Rebecca. "In 12,000 years of Imperial history, we have never seen change spread this rapidly or this thoroughly. Most reforms take centuries to implement and require extensive political negotiation. Human improvements are being adopted voluntarily by local authorities who then recommend them to their neighbors." Rebecca considered this information carefully. "You're worried about the speed of change." "We're worried about the implications," Emperor Kal corrected. "The Empire has maintained stability for millennia through careful balance between different species, cultures, and political factions. Rapid change, even positive change, can disrupt that balance. What would you like us to do?" The silence that followed was telling. These were beings who had spent centuries managing galactic politics, but they were facing a situation their experience hadn't prepared them for. Finally, Defense Minister Vax spoke. "We're not sure. Your people aren't violating any laws or treaties. You're not forcing changes on anyone. You're simply helping when asked, and the results speak for themselves." General Stone pulled out her tablet and reviewed some recent reports. "I can see your concern. Change at this pace could be destabilizing if it's not managed properly." She looked around the table at the assembled leaders. "Would it help if we slowed down the rate of consulting? We could put some formal review processes in place, maybe require approval from sector governors before implementing major organizational changes." "That would certainly be more traditional," admitted Foreign Minister Tal. "But it would also reduce effectiveness. The reason human methods work so well is that they focus on practical solutions rather than political considerations." Emperor Kal touched another control, and the display changed to show economic and efficiency statistics. "The improvements your species has made are not just cosmetic. They represent fundamental changes in how the Empire operates. More efficient trade means better resource distribution. Improved military coordination means better security. Streamlined administration means citizens get better service from their government." He paused, studying the data with an expression that mixed satisfaction with unease. "These are all positive developments, but they're happening faster than we can assess their long-term implications." Rebecca nodded thoughtfully. "What if we approached this systematically? Instead of ad hoc consulting, we could establish formal improvement programs with built-in evaluation periods." "Explain." "Well, right now human advisors are working independently across the Empire. What if we coordinated those efforts? We could prioritize the most critical improvements, establish standards for implementation, and create feedback mechanisms to monitor results." She pulled up her own data on the tablet. "We could also train Imperial personnel in human organizational methods, so the improvements become self-sustaining rather than dependent on outside consultants." Defense Minister Vax's tentacles slowed their writhing. "You're proposing to systematize the improvement process." "Exactly. Instead of random changes happening wherever someone asks for help, we create a structured approach that considers the broader implications while still focusing on practical results." Admiral Nex leaned back in his chair. which creaked under his considerable bulk. This would require significant coordination between human advisors and Imperial authorities. It would, Rebecca agreed. But it would also give you more control over the pace and direction of change. Right now, improvements are happening based on local needs and requests. Under a coordinated system, you could prioritize changes that support broader Imperial goals. Emperor Kal was quiet for several minutes, studying the galactic map while the other leaders waited. Finally, he looked directly at Rebecca. General Stone, I have a question that may sound strange. Yes, sir? Does your species have any interest in ruling the Empire? Rebecca blinked in surprise. No, sir, absolutely not. Why not? You clearly have superior organizational abilities. You could probably improve Imperial governance significantly. Because we don't want to rule anyone. Rebecca said simply, we want to help solve problems. There's a difference. Explain that difference. Rebecca thought for a moment before answering. Ruling means taking responsibility for making decisions for other people. Problem-solving means helping people make better decisions for themselves. We prefer the second approach. She gestured toward the map. Look at how these improvements have spread. We didn't impose them on anyone. People saw the results, decided they wanted similar benefits, and asked for help implementing changes. That's much more sustainable than top-down mandates. Foreign Minister Tal's multiple eyes blinked in sequence. You're saying human methods work because they're voluntary. Partly, but also because they're practical. People adopt changes that make their lives better and ignore changes that don't. If our suggestions weren't actually helpful, they wouldn't spread. Emperor Kyle stood up and walked to the large window that looked out over the capital city. In the distance, ships were landing and taking off from the spaceport, with a regularity that would have been impossible before human traffic controllers had reorganized the flight patterns. Very well, he said finally. We'll implement your coordinated approach. But I want regular reports on all major changes, and I want human advisors working directly with Imperial oversight committees. That sounds reasonable, Rebecca agreed. There's one more thing, the Emperor added, turning back to face the group. I want to understand how your species thinks about these problems. Not just the solutions you propose, but the underlying approach you use to identify and analyze issues. Rebecca smiled. That's actually pretty straightforward. We ask 3 basic questions. What's the current situation? What would the ideal situation look like? And what's the most practical way to get from here to there? The silence that followed was different from the earlier pauses. This time, the alien leaders were clearly thinking through the implications of that simple framework. That's it? Asked Defense Minister Vax. 3 questions? Well, there are follow-up questions for each step, and the details can get complicated. But yes, that's the basic approach. Admiral Nex shook his head slowly. We spend months analyzing political implications, cultural sensitivities, historical precedents, and traditional procedures before implementing any changes. Those things matter, Rebecca acknowledged. But they're factors to consider during implementation, not barriers that prevent you from identifying what needs to be improved. Emperor Kyle returned to his seat with an expression that suggested he was seeing familiar problems from a completely new perspective. General Stone, I'm beginning to understand why your species makes my advisors nervous. Oh? You make everything seem obvious. Rebecca considered this for a moment. Maybe that's because most problems really are obvious once you look at them without assuming that complexity is the same thing as sophistication. She closed her tablet and looked around the table at the assembled leaders of the most powerful civilization in the galaxy. The Empire has incredible resources, brilliant people, and thousands of years of experience. You don't need humans to tell you how to run your civilization. You just need someone to occasionally point out that your current approach to running it might not be the only possible approach. Emperor Kal smiled for the first time since the meeting began. General Stone, I think you've just solved another problem. What's that? I was trying to figure out how to sleep better at night while humans systematically improve every aspect of Imperial operations. And? The answer is simple. Instead of worrying about the changes, I should focus on managing them effectively. He stood up, signaling the end of the meeting. Thank you for the consultation, General. I believe this has been very productive. As the alien leaders filed out of the conference room, Rebecca gathered her materials and reflected on what had just happened. Somehow a meeting about controlling human influence had turned into a planning session for expanding it more systematically. She smiled as she realized that this was probably exactly the kind of outcome that made the Emperor nervous in the first place. Humans had a tendency to solve problems even when the problem was supposed to be humans solving too many problems. It was going to be an interesting next few years.